everyone. Sorry, I should have stood up before when I was being introduced. I'm really quite excited about being here because I'm a bit passionate about creating built environments that are for the people who need to use them now and into the future. So, and particular relevance to my part of this project is, sorry, I've got a soft voice, is that I've had strategic planning experience looking at a whole of local government area planning study in the last few years, and concurrent with our community strategic plan. And also done some work within the public domain in relation to footpaths activities, and making sure that we're accommodating everyone that uses the footpaths. And I also should mention that last few years of life experience, my mother's going into that older age group where she's had a few falls. She's now walking with a frame, and she and I have been learning how to access built environments in a different way. So today my role is to talk about the fourth part of the resource that we're preparing, age-friendly built environments. So as mentioned earlier, the CODA project identified issues such as that there are lots of age-friendly resources out there. Not a lot of them are necessarily used. No clear means by which to include them in local government policies, plans and operations. Another checklist is not likely to help. But that, you know, and that's really what the basis of this section and the whole resource is about, is that it's intended to be a resource that has various layers, bridging the gap between those resources that are already out there and making them usable within council, within each of our functions of council and each of the plans and policies that we might be working with. So it's like a grab bag sort of situation. So the resource is really in its formative stages. I've only just started doing this, so I'm going to be trying to raise awareness really about planning in the built environment and what we're sort of thinking about putting into this section. So to do this, I'll give you a brief outline of the planning context and follow with the focus on three particular planning tools that are really, I really believe are useful for planning for age-friendly environments. So we've been talking a bit about community strategic planning. What I'd like to do is really take our heads out of that space under the Local Government Act and bring our heads over to the Environmental Planning Act and the planning framework and think about strategic land use planning, the sorts of things that town planners, urban regional planners are involved in. So really it's under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, looking at things like using terms like SEPs, local environmental plans, development control plans. And I understand that the majority of you here are from the community services sections. I'd actually like to just ask you to raise your hands if you have on staff in council someone employed as a strategic planner, strategic land use planner. At least one person at council employed as a strategic land use planner. Okay, thanks. Because I think that some of the councils actually employ strategic planners because they don't actually have that resource in-house. Some of you might be aware that there's two different frameworks going on at the moment. We've got the existing Environmental Planning and Assessment Act framework, and there's a major review of that planning system in New South Wales. You might be aware of it through the media. There's been a bit of talk about the Green Paper. You might be aware of it through work. But basically the current framework, of course, we talk about SEPs, LEPs, the Metropolitan Strategy for those metropolitan councils, regional and sub-regional strategies, and we've all been involved in converting our LEPs to the standard instrument format. And then, of course, there's the Green Paper and the concepts of what planning in future might be in New South Wales, a replacement for the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. And there's talk of terms like New South Wales planning policies, local land use plans. So submissions closed last week, so there's still a bit of time under the old system. But basically what we're thinking is that to make this a useful resource into the future, that really both frameworks speak the same language. They talk objectives, goals and aims, what we're wanting to achieve in our built environments, talking directions and strategies, how we're going to get to those objectives, and also what sort of controls and actions do we need to put in place. And then, of course, how to measure them. Have we got there? Have we got what we wanted to achieve? Now, back to the resource. So I'm really going to focus on 3 main planning areas, and I've thought, well, what's the best question we can ask? We can ask ourselves for an age-friendly built environment. So that the aim, being a user-friendly resource, the focus of part 4 will address how do we plan and design our built environments to assist the older persons in our communities, especially to assist them ageing in place. And of course, by ageing in place, as we all understand, it's not just about remaining in the family home, finding a smaller dwelling in the local community, moving in from the farm to the local township. It's also about finding places that will really satisfy those needs over time. It might be that there's some people who, some of the grey nomads, you know, finding places that they'd rather retire in. So the planning of built environments, these are the main tools that we're looking at, that we use, and some of you might, or probably a lot of you will understand that really we're looking at the main planning tools being principles such as integrating land use and transport. They're some of the best practice principles I'm talking about here. There's quite a range of them. There's things like environmentally sensitive design, and things like some of the guidelines and what they bring to the table. So really, I wanted to focus on, I'm sorry, I'm just racing a bit because I feel like I'm running out of time. But, so what I want to do is just focus on 3 particular areas of planning tools. I could talk a little bit about LEPs. There's not a lot we can do in LEPs in general. I mean, it is talk about where do we put housing in the future? How do we accommodate a range of housing types to support housing needs? And really, in the LEPs, we're sort of grabbing out of the community strategic plan some objectives that support those outcomes. But when we get down to the nitty-gritty and the real planning work that ends up with on-ground works, I think that the 3 main areas are planning studies, because that's really the evidence-based work, development control plans, because that provides more of the detailed provisions, and the call-up of other plans like public domain plans. And then that 3rd one is public domain planning, linkage planning. So turning first to land use planning, I think as most councils in New South Wales have been going through this process, we've undertaken a major review of our planning controls, and we've actually prepared a local planning study it's comprised of a suite of 7 documents: housing study, transport study, environment and open space. So just over to the left, we've got our community strategic plan and operational delivery plan. Basically, the local planning study was developed around the early stages of development of the community strategic plan, so made sure that they spoke to each other. And also the local planning study, of course, responds to those state strategies that we were talking about earlier, and provided some recommendations about how we're going to plan our built environments in future to accommodate our people, in the form of what do we do with our new comprehensive LEP? What do we put into our new comprehensive DCP? And what sort of other work do we need to look at that's not quite ready to go into those planning controls? So as I said, it had 7 main outcomes. They sort of related to our community strategic plan outcomes, but we looked in depth at housing, small centres, centres and corridors, environment and open space employment, cultural heritage and transport. Now what I've done is I've just put in green those areas that I've thought are really the key areas for neighbourhood planning and accommodating our older people, especially higher proportions of older people and our younger people, a whole range of groups. And it's about creating livable communities on a smaller scale, around home, and the short distance destination. It's talking about the 400 metre walkable distances. So in particular, in the local planning study, of course we've got housing studies, a lot of councils are involved in those, and that really tells us who are our people, who are our older people, where are they living now, what sort of accommodation do they need in future, do the land use plans actually accommodate that accommodation, what can we do in our planning controls to assist that, where can we support growth, or where can we encourage growth, where can we support and strengthen existing centres that are thriving now. Sorry, I just missed a slide. And basically what we came up with was some strategic directions. These strategic directions are like those that respond to the state government strategies. An example from our community strategic plan outcome of a city of wellbeing is that strategic direction states improve access to a range of housing types which meet the needs of present and future residents. So I've actually been thinking, okay, well that was RIDE's work, that's what we've been through, but how can that inform this part 4, aged friendly built environments section of the resource? So what I'm asking you to do is think about your council. Your council, you might be thinking, you might already have an ageing strategy, you might be thinking of preparing an ageing strategy. Another option might be that you're looking at Another option might be that you prepare a livable neighbourhood strategy, and that might encompass an ageing strategy, youth strategy, cultural strategy, housing strategy. So a bit like the suite of documents we had. So you make it more a suite of documents. It drills down from the outcomes of your community strategic plan. And it also helps to avoid marginalisation of certain groups. So now I'm just going to have a look at our second area, or the second focus area I wanted to talk to you about, and that's development control plans. These are the more detailed planning provisions which support council's LEPs, and this is where, I guess, the real local land use happens. We've got certain restrictions in what we can put in our local environmental plans, but this comes down to what we can put in to design our public spaces outside of centres. In redevelopment, we can make sure that new developments are better designed now in accordance with best practice principles and design guidelines. So the main aims and choice of land use under our new draft LEP support the development of livable communities, but much of the detail on how to get there is in the new draft DCP. Just as an example, couple of the strategic directions under the planning study: support the role of small and neighbourhood centres. Support the role that small and neighbourhood centres have within the City of Ryde. Enhance the attractiveness of centres through improvements to the public domain. So what we've then said in the actions is detailed development controls be prepared for small centres. Development control plans and public domain plans are to clearly articulate the open space outcomes required in each centre. So we've got one small centre I'll give you an example of. This is one that's been targeted for growth. It's actually quite a thriving little centre in amongst low density residential area where there's quite a proportion of people who are ageing in place. And it's been earmarked for development, well, for growth to accommodate many more dwellings. So we're looking for some development uptake in this area. So in doing that, we've put some controls into the development control plan to encourage site amalgamation, some controls that look at the built form to provide for a better response for the people who are going to be using those centres, and also for the public domain. I'm going to talk about that public domain plan in a minute, but just thinking about part 4 of the resource. What out of the right experience would be useful for a resource for all councils? Things like there might be model objectives that you can put into your development control plans that support livable communities. There might be some public domain controls that have an age-friendly focus that you could insert into the development control plans. There might be some example development control plans for things like small neighbourhood centres that are useful for supporting your people who are ageing in place, your communities, your pockets of communities where there are more people ageing in place. And there might be some examples that some of the councils represented here have that they can share. Be great if you could let us know about those ones. So coming to the third focus area, public domain planning. And really this is related to what Coda was talking about, the toilets, the wayfinding, the footpaths. I'll just draw a diagram for you. I'm really quite passionate about this. We've got people ageing in place. Home. Sorry, I should be talking up here. So we've got, there are 3 areas that I like to think about. That's housing, people's homes, where they'll be ageing in place. Then outside the front gate, that's where the public domain starts. And thinking about the destinations that people want to go to and need to go to. And that's, I think, what Catherine was talking about. Katie was talking about this, I think. The highly valued destinations, like medical centres and things like that. So they're over here. So we have those linkages and connections in between. And for age friendliness, I'm talking walkable footpaths, short distances, community bus transport. I'm talking other types of transport. And then what we need to focus in on is looking at the interface between the two, especially when we get to the centres. So this is where the development control plans and the public domain planning work together to make sure that interface works for the connections between home and those destinations outside of the home. And also where I think the walk and talk application would be highly treasured, highly useful. So, for example, at Ryde, we've got 2 particular documents. We've got the public domain technical manual, and that articulates for a range of centres across the LGA what public domain features need to be applied with development. So when applications come into council, we make sure that the public domain outside of those development sites is treated in an appropriate manner. Critical with this, of course, is that we need to have a look at, we've looked at council's own programs for urban renewal in our centres and public domain renewal. So another document that's critical to that is the centre's public domain upgrades. And that's basically looking at costings, or looking at each of the centres, working out how the public domain needs to be upgraded. How do we make sure that there are accessible toilets in each of the centres? How do we make sure that we've got the seating right? Those sorts of things. How much is it going to cost for each of these centres? And also, which centres are the ones that need the priority attached to them? So basically, that really ties in planning controls. The public domain plans tie in the planning controls back into the operational and delivery plans, the community strategic plan, and the actual on-ground works. And I think importantly, public domain plans have been prepared, well, where we are by landscape architects and urban designers, and they, they always stress to me, good design does include all those features of the guidelines that are out there and more. And of course, not all councils are resourced with that sort of approach, with that sort of staffing. So in thinking about the sorts of opportunities for how the resource can help, it might be that they're getting the brief right for when councils are considering engaging landscape architects, perhaps urban designers, to renew their designs for their public domain. I just wanted to point to this because under the local planning study, it was determined that there should be better linkages between small centres and open spaces, especially if there's not an opportunity to put a park in a centre. So there've actually been some linkages prioritised across the local government area. And I'd like you to think about this from this perspective of, I should point out this circle is where that centre is that has been earmarked for growth. But picture this in your own council area. You've got low density residential, you've got a small centre, desired destinations, and you've got along that line, that dotted red line at the other end, perhaps seniors living. And really, it's thinking about, okay, this is probably one of those priority links. And thinking about the photos that Catherine showed us before, the dirt road, or those sorts of examples. Taking a look at these critical links to the small centres and back, again, between homes, the desired locations, and having the conversations in council about prioritising works on these particular linkages. So really, planning controls, planning studies, working together with community services, ageing strategies, open space strategies, talking to asset managers about the condition of the assets, can work together to make these priority linkages work. So like I said, thinking about how can public domain planning that we've carried out, for example, or anywhere, be useful for the resource. It might be that we can provide you with some briefs for public domain plans or designs, public domain technical manual examples, a checklist for public domain planning, for costings, priorities, small centres planning, key factors to take into account when you're planning in small centres and the associated public domain. Linkages programs. What key factors do you need to take into account in looking at a linkages program? And again, perhaps your council has good examples that you might like to share as well. So in doing all this thinking, I do think quite a bit. I've been thinking quite a bit lately. That's why I'm trying to race through a bit. There's a lot to cover. However, you know, there's some other things that we could do. There's always something else we can do. You know, even attending workshops like today, we come up with new ideas and then think, oh, we must remember that for the next community strategic plan review. So another couple of thoughts I've had is about housing and livable housing design, because there's movement in that area. And it might be that in our development control plans in councils, we can make a percentage of multi-dwelling housing developments be required to meet the livable housing guidelines. For example, you could put a control in there that says a certain percentage of this development of a certain number of dwellings or a certain scale must meet the Silver Award standard. Looking at our destinations over here, the highly valued places set minimum requirements that are no negotiation for putting in access based on priority for active transport. Making sure, we've had a couple of issues about this, making sure that we do accommodate, we do have a community bus service and making sure that they have the opportunities to stop in our centres. Okay. So this is summing up. I've mentioned quite a few things. It's basically a summing up slide of the sorts of things that the Part 4 of the age-friendly resource could cover. And I'd really encourage you to take one of these feedback forms, have a look at the prompts in there, because all 4 parts of the resource are covered. And I hope that, you know, there's been some thought-provoking discussion here today. And really, you know, we're really encouraging you to do this because it'll help focus in our opportunity to really make this a useful resource. Okay, thank you very much.